So we're back. I'm here with Chris Lord. We are excited to have him. He is the founder of Bridge Builder Coaching. He helps executives and military through tough transitions in their lives. In his previous life, before his early retirement, he successfully built 4 consulting businesses here in Southern California. And his last role was as general manager at Slalom Consulting. So with that, Chris, I want to open up to you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Christy. Hopefully we don't get the feedback and everything, but we'll try to do this and get a little tidbit out there. So good evening. So when Christy asked me to do this and do it in kind of short order, I had to think a little bit. And so part of it is just to try to give a little transition shot in the arm tonight. Nothing too long, kind of quick and to the point. And so one of the things I always get asked is when people are in transition, how long is that next job going to be? Because part of it is thinking about your amount of time and energy and the importance you put on your next transition should be equal to about the duration of that next job. And if that next job in average in the United States is a little less than 3 years right now, the fact is it's a pretty important move, but it's not necessarily life altering if you make a mistake. And what I tell a lot of people is you can certainly learn a lot by taking jobs you don't want, just like trying to find your dream job. But I do believe there is a dream job out there for everybody. And I do believe that a big part of it is looking at kind of what your life priorities are and then going and finding a job that matches that versus what most people do is they go find a job that sounds really interesting and then they switch their life priorities to match that job. And so I've used this for years and I'll put it up on the screen here, just a little framework. And this framework that I use is the 5 things everybody wants from their job. Live where you work means you don't get on a plane every week. Love who you work with means you actually have deep emotional connection with the people that you work with. They're not just kind of counterparts, they're more than that. Love what you do, meaning the thing that you do, the thing you toil at, the thing you put energy into and construct and deliver is the juice for you. Reasonable hours, which everybody giggles at because a lot of times reasonable doesn't totally mean total number of hours. It means the flexibility as well. And then good money, making good money. Everybody would say, doesn't everybody want to make good money? Sure. And of course, everybody wants all 5 of these. But the theory here, the kind of working construct is at any one position in any one company at any one point in time, you can really only get 3. And so you have to be willing to give up 2 to get 3. And so when you think about this and think about what you want, not what you can put up with, not what you can kind of just gut it out, but what do you really want? And a lot of times this requires a conversation with people around you, people that are important to you, people, whether that's your kids, whether that's your spouse, significant other, your, aging parents, et cetera, because we're all at a different point in our lives. And part of that is, once again, the biggest mistake I see people make when they're in transition is they take a job and then try to conform their life to the job versus looking at their life priorities through this type of construct, if you will, and then finding a job that actually matches that. Like one of the ones that comes up a lot is, if I want to give up reasonable hours, would I ever go interview at Amazon? Well, my perspective is no, because everybody knows you don't get reasonable hours at Amazon. And rightfully so. They pay you a bunch of money. They've got a very unique culture. But the fact is, if you want reasonable hours, it's probably not a great place to go, and you probably shouldn't even go interview. My point is, before you ever interview, you should know whether or not that position is going to give you the 3 you want. And if it's not going to give you the 3 you want, then I'd ask the question, why are you interviewing? And so I think part of this is just to give you all time to think about what 2 would I be willing to give up? And while you're thinking about it, and we're going to open this up for questions in about, 6-7 minutes. While you're thinking about that, let me give you some typical patterns. So typical patterns, there's 2 that stand out as probably the most common patterns, and that is people who are willing to give up number 2 and number 4. People who, if they don't travel for work, they love what they do and they make good money doing it. They really don't care who they do it with, and they don't care how many hours it takes. What I call a 1-3-5, because that's the 3 they want. Typically a 1-3-5, what I always say is, if you're a 1-3-5, big fish, small pond, or higher on the food chain, if you will, or go do your own thing. Because typically people who are willing to give up 2 and 4 want control of what they do. And so it's really important to think about control, and control in a large organization. If you're not very high in the food chain, typically somebody else really tells you what you do. And so you really don't get control of what you do, which means that you will do things you don't love. And you may even do things you hate. So that's kind of one typical pattern. The other typical pattern is people who are willing to be road warriors to get kind of the big 3, the 2, 3, and 5. So they're willing to get on the road every week. They're willing to work on reasonable hours because, life is the adventure. The Navy used to have a saying, for those of us who are old enough, their slogan used to be, "It's not just a job, it's an adventure," which to me was one of the greatest slogans of all time. So if you're willing to give up 1 and 4, then you're looking for a company that will really travel you around to do what you want to do and pay you hazard duty pay to do it, and put a lot of money into culture. Typically, a lot of 2, 3, 5 people that want those 3 things end up at consulting companies, typically big consulting companies first, and then after that, possibly smaller consulting companies, because a lot of those companies are kind of tailor-made to give you 2, 3, and 5. They put millions of dollars into culture. They ship you all around the country to do what you love to do, so you're getting better and better and better at that thing over and over and over. And because you're getting better at it, and because you're traveling, they pay you for it. And they pay you typically very well. So when you think about this, once again, part of it is to think about your life priorities, what you really want, what your what your Elysium is, if you will, and then go out and get it versus go try to find jobs, or you listen to somebody said this company is really awesome to work for, but it doesn't mean it's awesome for you to work for. And so I would just say, don't be deterred from what you really want. Go out and get it, and make sure that every job interview you go on can give you the 3 you want to get. So with that, just a quick kind of shot in the arm, if you will. So with that, we can open it up for questions, or Christy, if there's questions that are floating around, let's take some.
Thank you. You guys can go ahead on LinkedIn Live. You can add questions into the comments. What have you seen that's been different during the COVID time period with how people are allocating kind of their 1 through 5s? Have you seen any changes between what they might have selected last time and what they might be selecting now in this new environment?
I think the biggest one is people who are willing to give up number 1, but aren't having to travel. That right now you can actually you can be willing to give up number 1, but not have to.
Right.
That's probably the biggest thing.
Oh, that's very interesting. Let me see here.
The other thing I would say is, sorry, my connection's bouncing a little bit. The other thing I would say is, I think people are working more reasonable hours right now. I think there are lots of people who are not working as hard, which is a really good thing in a lot of cases.
Oh, that's interesting. I feel like I'm working even more. I know a lot of my colleagues have been working more, but probably because of the industry that we're in with all the different changes around human capital. So I think it's, just an interesting time. And I've found that hours have definitely spread out over the day more. It used to be a little more concentrated. Are you seeing any other trends right now, kind of post-COVID, how people might be hiring?
The only thing I've seen really is there are companies and industries that are having amazing years. There are companies out there that are having the best years of the existence of their companies. I think the good news is, especially smaller companies that are under a couple $100 million, March, April made those people become better business people. So I think a lot of people who run companies have actually become better business people in the making early in the year because of COVID and the lockdown. And so I think they're actually having more success now because that kind of crunch time made them become better business people. And so I actually see people that their companies are making more money than they've ever made. And they are looking, investing into more human capital and gaining more talent. They're obviously, everybody I think is a little nervous about what's going to happen in the next week or so. But the fact is, I think a lot of people are sitting on cash and ready to spend it on people once the election is over and settles down. And I take those two things separately. Over and settled down may not be the same day.
True. And I'm glad to hear about your optimism for, people having cash and trying to get jobs. What would you say to people kind of as an encouragement to them as they're going through this period where a job search in general is very, very difficult, just going through it in a regular time, right? I've worked with you through both of my transitions and I'm right all over you the whole time. What do you feel, what do you think could be an encouragement for people, or what would you say to people who are going through this during a time of COVID?
I think the good news is this pandemic has affected everybody in some way, personally affected everybody in some way. And so I think what I've noticed is a lot of people that are hiring are a lot more sensitive and a lot more empathetic to the people that are going through transition right now on top of everything else. I actually think people are more caring. And that's a good thing.
I love that. That's amazing. I'm hoping to actually see some shifts post-COVID for a couple things. One is that there won't be the stigma anymore around unemployment, because likely after this, everybody will have been employed at some point, so that
for sure,
people, even if you're not working right now, we would be disqualified previously if you weren't working for some roles. So I am hopeful about that. And then I like what you're saying, especially in the recruiting realm. We see a lot of ghosting and a lot of challenges. I'm hopeful for that will shift as well. Do you have any hopes that you're looking at kind of to see in the future ahead?
Well, I think the ghosting thing is hard because if you look at the struggle of talent acquisition in any company, the problem is with the advent of tools like LinkedIn, instead of historically somebody would get 100 resumes for a position, and to get 100 resumes, like the people had to do work to get you their resume. Where nowadays it's so easy just to click a button that I, instead of 1,000, I get 5,000. And the fact is probably 4,500 of those I should have never gotten. So I think part of it is the reason that there is a stigma around ghosting, and is if I had to take the time to send a rejection letter to the 4,500 people that probably should have never applied, it'd waste all my time. So I think if anything, what I would be hopeful of is that people stop applying for jobs they really shouldn't get anyhow. And then that way there wouldn't be so much ghosting.
I love that you always have tough love. He always has, he when I used to be like in my drama from my job search, he would be like nailing it right in my center and be like, oh, okay, good point. For you and your coaching right now and your business, I know that you've been doing a lot with military. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's what I do the majority of my time. I volunteer to help military veterans get jobs, and really I help them with their transition, because for a lot of them, it is the first major transition they've ever gone through in their life, because they decided at 17 or 18 to go into the military. And, in a lot of cases, that was their only option. So it wasn't a big transition. It was the only option. And so they did it. And so now they're getting out, some of them 8 years later, some of them 20 years later, some of them 32 years later. And they've never had some of the skills that in the professional commercial world we've developed, because jobs don't last that long in the civilian world. And so a lot of these men and women are, in their 30s or 40s and have never had to find a job. And so it's both terrifying for them and kind of inspiring that, my perspective is their next dream job's out there. But a guy told me a story once. He was a commander with the Special Forces, and we were on version 17 of his resume. And he basically said, this is the hardest thing I've ever done, which I thought was really interesting given the other things he did. And he basically said, I'd rather have you drop me out of a helicopter in Afghanistan with no rucksack and no weapon than to do another version of my resume, because at least I know what I'm doing in that space. So it is sometimes terrifying and sometimes enlightening to see the things that those of us who have been in the commercial world for a long time kind of take for granted, like writing resumes. Yeah, you do it. It's just something you do. Where these men and women who have been in harm's way for our country have a different skill set that they are comfortable with.
What do you see in your coaching between someone in the military making that transition and executives that you coach? Do you have a different style that you use with each of them?
I would say it's typically the same. It's very, as you know and experience, it's very direct and kind of right down the pipe. I think that a lot of times the difference is the military veterans have no preconception of what civilian work is like or what certain industries are like, where a lot of executives have a lot of preconceptions about certain things, and most of them are not true. And so you have to actually unwind more baggage from executives than you do from veterans, because the veterans are kind of like, I assume that I'm not worth anything anymore because I'm not carrying a weapon or I'm not doing intelligence scouting or something else, versus, I have executives who believe because they were the CEO of a $10 million company, they should be able to go run a $1 billion company. So, and you got to kind of help them the best you can.
That's you, exactly. Just straight down the middle. What do you think with now jobs switching? Obviously many people are working at home right now, and that trend may continue for a while. Do you think that's going to affect kind of how people look at their work or look at these 5 things? You talked a little bit about travel.
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things, I think people who have over the last 6 months gotten more time at home and have enjoyed it, because I think there's people who have gotten time at home and have not enjoyed it. But I think a lot of people have gotten time at home and enjoyed it, and that may shift how they go back to work from here on out. It may change their work behaviors forever. And in a lot of cases, that's a really good thing, especially when it comes to family and kids. I think a lot of people have had a super rare opportunity in the last 6 months to get more time with their family and their kids without having to be out of work. And so I think that is going to change. I think it's also going to change from companies' perspectives. There's companies in the Bay Area that have said, they don't plan to go back on campus until 2022 already. And that could get pushed out again. So I think there are a lot of companies that are looking at real estate assets and trying to decide, do I need all this office space? Because people are kind of showing they can be successful working from home. And I think it's going to change on both sides. I think it already has. I would probably not recommend a bunch of people going into commercial real estate in the East Coast or West Coast right now.
I know that you're an entrepreneur. You've worked in big business before. For you being at home and with your consulting business, I know a lot of it is just out of the generosity of your heart, but how have you seen this affect your own business, and what have you done to kind of overcome any impacts that this time has had for you?
Yeah, I had a couple of clients that actually, stopped working with me because their businesses basically went bankrupt. That the pandemic hit in a way that was right in the center line of their revenue stream. And they basically decided we are going to close our shop for a while. So, and I've actually used some of the extra time, if you will, just to double down on the veteran stuff, because the good news is I coach veterans all around the world. I coach veterans that are deployed certain places in the world. And so from an ability to call them and Zoom with them, although I'm kind of over the whole Zoom thing, like a lot of people are, I did get to teach in person at a base outside of DC 2 weeks ago and a base outside of North Carolina last week. So that was good to see people in person. But it has affected my business for sure. I'm kind of just rolling with it and trying to use the extra time to get some projects done and some other things. And, make the best of it where I can. So minus the fires that make the air quality so bad we can't go outside and exercise.
That is very true.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions from the chat. What is your advice to executives that are trying to achieve the next level title? For example, move to a C-level. Do you need to take a step back to a smaller company to get the title in order to propel forward?
So the first question I would ask that person is, why do you want a C title? What is it about that? Because I think for a lot of people, when you start peeling that onion, it really comes down to two things, ego and money. And so the question is, do you really want that for a betterment perspective, or do you really want it just for money? And you can get it different ways depending on your answer. I think a lot of times if you're just chasing a title, then yeah, I would agree with what the person's kind of theory is, and that is maybe go get the title at a smaller company and then kind of upscale the company. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. But then I would also look at, once again, why do you want the title? What's it doing for you? And kind of what is it doing? What is it doing for your life? And if it's really what you want, God love you. I think there's a lot of different ways to go get it. I think one of the best ways to go get it is take all the titles off of your resume and just write down what you did and see what they tell you your title is. Because I think titles on resumes are a horrible thing. I'm sure we'll now get lots of comments on that.
I mean, I think back to when you had to coach me out of my doing that same thing of the title and how much I didn't want to let it go and how I was on that path. And it really, for me, I just had to get to the point where I had to be more open, and it's what's worked for me. But I did I know that, it was a huge step for me to be okay, let's just find the next thing and move forward and let go of the title and the ego. Dang, those egos. They're tough ones, folks.
They're tough. Yeah. We spend the first part of our life building them and the second part tearing them down.
It's true. It's true. Our next question is, what is your advice to folks, on number 3, when you don't really know what you love to do, especially those coming out of the military, maybe?
Yeah, I think that the easiest thing that I always tell people is a lot of times you can figure out what you love to do by writing down first what you hate to do. In some ways, it's like a sculptor taking a block of marble and chipping away all the stuff that they know they don't want to get down to kind of a rough shape, and then they fine tune it from there. Is you can learn a lot about what you love doing by writing down what you hate doing, and then exploring that and talking to people about. I think we get caught up on titles and functions and stuff like that. What I always say is, if you can describe what you want without using a title, a function, or an industry, you'll get your dream job. But it's really hard. It's really because people want to say, I used to go to networking events and I'd write down on a piece of paper how many people started their introduction with, "Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a vice president of whatever, whatever, whatever." Everybody does it. And the fact is, it's one of the worst things you can do. And so if you can tell me what you want without using a title, a function, or an industry, you'll probably get your dream job.
I love
it. Easier said than done, but it's so hard. Yes.
So hard. What are you, speaking about connecting and networking these days, what are you seeing about how people are going about connecting with others? Are you seeing them on Zoom or just one-on-ones? And how are they connecting, and how are you connecting with others?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is there are some platforms out there, Zoom, and there's one that USC uses. I think it's called Remo, and there's a couple other ones that are actually meant for online networking. That's pretty cool, where you can sit at tables, and then all you see on your screen is the 4 people at your table, and then you can get up from a table and walk to a different table and sit down, and then you see that group of people. So there's some cool platforms out there that I've had the pleasure of sitting in on. I also think, there are a lot of people who are like, "I'll meet you for coffee, get me out of the house." I'll sit 10 feet away from you as long as I get out of the house. So I think there are people who are doing that as well. And I do think a lot of people are networking on Zoom, for sure.
I'm going to have to check out that software. We've been using Zoom to do speed network, groups of 5 through the breakout rooms, but I like the idea of that room where you can get up and go to the next room and kind of manage that as well.
Yeah, send me a note. I'll get you the exact, I think it's called Remo, but it was cool. And it had you could set up multiple floors, and some floors had 4 tops and some floors had 10 tops and stuff. It was really cool. It was a little hard for an old dude to figure out at first, but it was really cool and it worked really well. We did a networking thing for, I don't know, 150, 160 people. It was really cool.
That's fantastic. And we are ever young. Always.
I tell people I'm not that old. I'm just high mileage.
Is there anything else? I don't see any other questions in the chat, but did this bring up anything else for you that you want to share with us, or any advice or encouragement to people?
Like I said, I think the one thing I will say is there are people out there that frankly just need a job. They need income, which I get, and I'm totally cool with that. I think the biggest thing I would tell people is even if you have to just go get a job, don't stop looking for your dream job. That you can find your dream job. The problem is most people, especially people who have spent the time to come onto a session like this, or type A people, what I always tell them is what it means though is the job you're taking just to make money, you're going to have to consciously make a decision to suck at so that you can spend enough time finding your dream job, which is really hard for people to go into a job, even though they took a job they don't really love, to go into a job and consciously suck at it is really hard for people. So, and nobody can do 2 things well. So you can't do really good at your job and do really good at finding your next job. It's humanly impossible. Nobody can do it.
And it takes time, right? We know that it can take a year or 2 for executives. And so balancing that with the other things that you're doing, just keep at it as well, right? Like keep making connections,
have fortitude, and make sure you feel like you accomplished something every week. That's the big thing I would say is just make sure that, by Friday afternoon, you feel really good about what you did that week, because it can be a slog for sure. Transition is hard. Anybody who tells you it's not is lying to you. Transition's hard.
It's true. It's very hard. And on that note, how can people get in touch with you if they saw this today and they don't know you? What's the best way for them to connect?
They can always send me a message through LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is CLord1. Yeah, and so you can always send me a note and connect with me on there, for sure.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being kind of my first Zoom to restream to a LinkedIn Live event. I know that our community was so happy to see you tonight. I got a lot of messages from everybody out there in the community. So thank you.
Cool.
And
awesome.
Just stay well, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight.